Norfolk Business Show with Danny Snelling. Sponsored by MT Comms.
So today we're going to welcome Neil Tarbet to the studio, and I've known Neil quite a few years now, and you've helped me out with a mortgage as well.
Yes.
But yeah, Neil does mortgages, and
For fun, yeah.
I don't know. Obviously, the twang isn't Norfolk, so. Do you want to start from the beginning and maybe a bit of work history and then see where you ended up?
It's a long time ago, but
we've certainly got a few connections in common from the property scene anyway, from years gone by. So.
Yeah, we know a few of the same people. So as you pointed out, originally I'm an Essex boy. I was there till I did my A-levels at 18. Decided against uni and wanted to work. Always wanted to work in London. So. My dad had a pub in Suffolk, bizarrely, and through a connection in there, I got my first job in the print industry. I used to do computer-aided design. Company I worked for made all the cutting tools in the print. So I used to do cardboard engineering, really, so two-dimensional drawings of 3D objects. So a lot of cinema displays, things for Disney, boring stuff like folders, boxes. Basically, if it's cardboard and has to fold into something, we probably made a tool for it.
Right. Did you say you didn't go to uni? Was that sort of conscious decision at the time, or?
I after my first year, so I did my GCSEs. I'm one of those people that I suppose I sailed through GCSEs without having to work too hard, and still managed to get past sort of C grade acceptable passes without being an A grade student. I took that same approach with A-levels and discovered very quickly that wasn't going to work. I ended up doing physics, maths and chemistry at A-level, and didn't excel in the first year. So I did look for work at 17 as an option of maybe not even going back and doing my second year of A-levels. Didn't get a job that really offered anything, so decided I did go back, knuckle down, and managed to scrape some fairly low grade A-levels. So at that point, I was done with education. Wanted to get into the world of work. I'd sort of worked as a 14, 15-year-old. As I said, my dad had a pub, so I used to wait tables and started off as pot boy there. I used to pick fruit in the summer holidays, so me and my friend would go to the pick your own, and we'd stock the shop.
And what sort of ages were these? I'm always intrigued.
14. So I mean,
there's definitely a common theme already emerging here. Everyone sat in that chair so far has started work quite early.
Yeah, I mean, back then at 14, my parents would allow me to hop on my little Peugeot road bike during the summer holidays and go out for the day, basically, and kind of do what I wanted. So, as I said, me and a friend, we'd go to the pick your own. We'd pick the strawberries and bits for the shop. So we were there at like 5 a.m. till maybe 8, and we get paid on whatever we pick for the day. We'd take our, I don't know, 10, 15 pounds, whatever we'd got, and we'd then go off and do what we wanted for the day. Bit of fishing down the river, fishing rod on the crossbar and some bread and cheese, and you just amused yourself, really. So I suppose I entered the world of work at around sort of 14. Enjoyed the benefits of having a bit of extra money. I'm sure, like a lot of parents back then, my parents didn't give me a huge amount of pocket money, but both my parents were merchant bankers. They met working for a Russian merchant bank in the city. So about the age of 12, I was given my child benefit on a weekly basis to teach me about money and budgeting. I remember once I wanted some Reebok pump Graphite trainers, and my dad was like, well, absolutely, you can get those. How much is in your bank account? And I was like, well, we're not going to buy them for you. You're getting £7.25 a week, I think it was, child benefit. So you can save up with that. And so, they were quite good at teaching me about money and finance and things from an early age.
I'm not sure if it done me any favours or not, but I remember wanting this Sony Walkman at the time. Amazing looking thing. Obviously, I'm always been into my gadgets, but I really wanted it. And my dad said, yeah, you can have it. I'll get it on finance for you, and you can pay me. I'll take it out of your wages because I work for him. it was 13 or whatever. And yeah, it did. I don't know. It taught me about finance, I suppose. And,
Yeah,
I don't know if
yeah,
it's
I
a good
think
thing or a bad thing, but I've used finance fairly avidly over the years.
Yeah, I think, looking back, I'm sure I was an ungrateful child, but at the time, but yeah, looking back and you think actually it's been a useful skill to learn. I'm sure it probably didn't stop me spending far too much money, with a bit like you, a love of gadgets and shiny things and designer clothes and stuff over the years. But yeah, I think it gave me a good grounding when it came to sort of earning money and saving for things, and being able to actually pay for stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting.
So yeah, sorry, where were we up to?
We were talking work, weren't we?
Yeah.
So yeah, as I said, so I started working in the print industry. I started up at quite a large company. From there, I moved across to a smaller, almost startup firm, which went quite well for a couple of years. And sadly, that ended. I got made redundant from there. I literally made redundancy, I think, by 2 days. I've been there 2 years and 2 days when they decided we all got called over on a Friday afternoon to head office at sort of lunchtime and were told that it was no more. I was very lucky that we used to outsource work to another small local company who hadn't yet digitised, so they were still doing everything by hand, whereas we had lasers and various other CAD technology. So I phoned Barry, the owner, on the way home. He said, come and meet me. So I literally went across to his place of work. I started work with him on the Monday. So I was out of work for half a day. Off the back of redundancy. And Barry was keen to go down the technology route that the firm I'd been at had been down. So got me on board to basically make that transformation with his business. That took around 18 months to train him and the other people there. And then we reached a point where I'd kind of done myself out of a job, because all this tech and things he brought in and training everyone else how to use it, it was then, there's not really anything left for you to do. Yeah. So we had quite an honest conversation about that. I was on the tube on the way home, picked up the Metro, the newspaper, flicked through Bairstow Eves, looking for estate agency staff training. I was like, do you know what? I've always quite been interested in houses and property. People have told me I have the gift of the gab. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can certainly talk a lot. I thought, well, do you know what? Where's the harm in putting in a CV? So applied for a job with Bairstow Eves and got the job. And there started a 12-year career with Countrywide in estate agency. So I worked initially in East London, covering East Ham, Stratford, Barkingside. I then, in a relationship, relocated up to Norfolk and transferred across with Countrywide to work for Hawkins on Exchange Street.
And that was because of the relationship. She lived up here, presumably.
Her family, she worked in London. We'd been together a few years. We rented a flat in Wanstead. Our landlord decided to sell. So we thought it was a time to consider our living arrangements. So we looked to move up to Norfolk. She never ended up moving, which is a long story that we won't get into here. It's not business related. No. But we still talk occasionally. Her dad still lives in Munsley. So I moved up, and because I transferred with work and things like that, I was kind of a bit almost sort of in limbo. So I thought, you know what, we'll make the best of it. So I made some good friends in that period through Greens, the gym in Norwich, that are still friends to this day. Ian Forrest, that you know from estate agency, he and I met at Abbott's. We're still good friends. He lives in Spain now, so I'm off out there in April for his 40th birthday. So nice. We've known each other 15, 16 years, I suppose. So yeah, I spent a period of time in estate agency in Norfolk. Then love struck again. I met my now ex-wife abroad on holiday, and she lived down in West Sussex. So I transferred with work, again with Countrywide, down to the King and Chasemore brand. Worked in Worthing on the south coast, Chichester, which is where I lived, a period in the Midhurst office, which is in the South Downs National Park. So again, very different geographically, different client bank. And then I spent my last few months down there working on the after sales side. I looked after after sales for the 5 Brighton offices for King and Chosemore.
And presumably being countrywide, there was quite a lot of training offered, and
It was at the time it was the biggest
systems
estate
and processes,
agents
isn't there? And,
in the UK. The training was good, and there was opportunities. Being a big chain, as I said, I moved up and was looking after things for sort of 5 branches and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed my time in estate agency, but again, the business model had shifted with purple bricks and things like that coming in. When I worked in Norwich, myself and Ian, we opened the Helsden office in the old greengrocers there on Reefham Road. For the first 18 months or so, I think we used to average 1.9% as a fee. I think these days, I've never paid more than 1% to sell a house, so I don't see what everyone else is doing. So a lot of things changed, and I was looking for a new challenge, really. And then my ex-wife worked as a financial advisor. And obviously, as you do, we're talking about, things. And she was like, well, why don't you look at mortgages? It's very parallel with what you do and what you like in terms of the housing market. Yeah, absolutely. So I got my CMAP exam papers. You can basically pay to get the stuff, and one shot at the exam, and basically sat and read through it twice. And then sat the 3 different exams to qualify in my own time. I had a couple of job offers, one with Countrywide, another with the Sequence Group, which is part of Connells. And I didn't really want to stay in the estate agency environment. In my last role at Countrywide, I was working Monday to Friday. And I'd loved having a day off in the week when I worked Saturdays, but suddenly having the weekend back, it was working well for me at the time, so I didn't want to go back to a role that involved working on a Saturday. So in the end, the 3rd job offer I had in the world of mortgages was for a company called CMME, which is Contractor Mortgages Made Easy. They specify in dealing with mortgages for day rate contractors, so mainly IT, finance professionals on short 6-month fixed term contracts. Often at the time earning £350, £400 a day. These days, most of my client bank probably earns over £500 a day. So quite a nice niche. So I went there for a couple of years. I had a friend through the gym who was a partner in a mortgage brokers in Chichester. He was bending my ear as soon as I qualified to come and work for them, but on a self-employed basis. I didn't have the bollocks to do it off the bat, to be quite honest, and I'm glad I didn't. Go into CMME, there were 32 mortgage brokers, of which I was one. Very, very strong training around process. We had amazing admin support, but admin support only works if all the brokers are doing everything the same. If we all do things in our own way, the admin can't support you. So I've always been quite a process-driven person. So that was really good for me. I've found I still, 8 years later, I think we are now, I still use some of those processes day to day in how I go about things with clients, the order in which I do things. I try and take all clients on the same journey. It stops me getting lost as much as anything, or
and then you get
doing
an
things
awkward
in the wrong
client
order.
like me who just dumps my accounts on you and says, you make sense of it.
I mean, some people don't want to give you any paperwork. Other people give you a lot of paperwork. But yeah, as I said, I find having a process really helps me, and it helps. I always think it helps the client, because 99.9% of the time we get the right outcome for the client. And as I said, doing that 2 years employed and having that process bit driven into me has really helped me when I became self-employed. I was very lucky during COVID that the business model that CMME have, the one which I've copied, is to be telephone based. So albeit with themselves, I had to go into the office, and we never saw clients face to face. Even to this day, even yourself, I did come to your house and see you, but most of the process was done by phone, by email. So I was lucky that I had the correct business model for COVID. And I've worked from home since March 2020. And yeah, as I said, it's just been the right business model at the right time.
As Teams or Zoom calls crept in more, or
It's crept in.
is it expected?
No. And again, the advantage for me not being face to face is time. So there's no travel time to see the client. There's no geographical restriction on where I can work. But also when you come to see someone in person, there is more small talk. If I'm speaking to a client during their lunch hour by telephone, an initial appointment can be 20 minutes, can be 30 minutes. It depends how many questions they've got. But quite often 20 minutes will be enough time because we get straight down to business. Seeing someone in person is nearly always an hour and a half. So there's good time savings there for me and for the client. To be honest.
And you don't think you lose anything by not having that person? I guess if you thought you would, you'd go and say, all right, if they're local, go off and go and see them.
There are elements of the process where you can perhaps, it depends where I concentrate on a niche. So I suppose I should talk about Free Spirit really, which is my company, but I started Free Spirit Mortgage nearly 2 years ago. So I came away from being self-employed for the firm based in Chichester. I'd moved back up to Norwich in 2020. Suddenly I was working for a firm who had a presence 200 miles away. It just wasn't making sense anymore. But I still have a great relationship with Mark and Andy from the firm where I used to be. They understood my reasons for starting on my own. And it gave me an opportunity to think about what I'd done over the 5 years of self-employment, the clients I wanted to work with. I love the freedom, the flexibility of self-employment. I've come here today from the golf course, that old adage of being self-employed and playing a lot of golf. But I like the fact that if I don't have work to do, I can actually make use of that time for me.
Or you can just, do the work into the evening instead of.
If I want to do a couple of hours work on Saturday morning, well, I can do that. As you say, if I want to start early one morning because I'm doing something, perhaps attending lunch club with you on a Friday or something like that, I can schedule work around other things that I want to do.
I think most people give business owners a bit of grief for that, but we always pay the price for any time off, don't we? In one way, shape or another, we're always playing either catch up if we've just taken a day off or working a bit late.
The work still
early.
has to be done. And if there isn't work to do, we don't make any money. I think that's the other element, because people often say, well, I'm not sure if I was working from home for myself, I'd be disciplined a bit. Well, you would, because you wouldn't be doing it for very long, because money runs out very quickly when there isn't any coming in. But Free Spirit is all about helping self-employed people get a mortgage and to carry on being self-employed. I sometimes speak to clients who were doing quite well self-employed, then wanted to buy a house, so they took a permanent position back up again, got a mortgage, and then went back to being self-employed. And it shouldn't and doesn't have to be like that. And as I said, that's very much my company is about working with self-employed people. So far, about 18 months in, over 70% of my clients are self-employed. I think self-employed people make up about 15% of the workforce. So, we really do. When we say we specialise in working with self-employed people, I really do. It makes up the vast majority of my
and it's
clients.
Great to have a niche, if you like, because it's obviously sets you apart from your competition, but also, it's all about that being specific, isn't it? It's easier to perhaps be specific, even if your specific is a smaller part of the mortgage, smaller part of the pie, if you like.
Absolutely. And to be honest, I niche even further into self-employment where, in the main, certainly on social media, I'm advertising and looking for day rate contractors. That still makes up probably 50% plus of my business. I've been very fortunate that clients followed me from my employed role. I was very good with my gardening leave and not taking any names and information, but LinkedIn's a great source of new business for me. I get a lot of clients from there. I'm reasonably well established on there now in that contractor space, so I've collaborated with some people on there around sort of doing weekly posts about mortgages for that niche. I'm lucky I have a couple of clients who have their own communities on things like that on LinkedIn, where they're looking to help sort of first-time contractors or people who are new to it understand recruitment. These guys will be talking to people about accounts, ensuring you have a savings account, you're tacking your VAT away, your tax away, so good solid advice. And I sit within a couple of these communities as their sort of, mortgage advice person. If someone's curious, you can go from...
So is it in any way regulated in terms of advice? Obviously financial advice is very, very regulated. Is this different than that in that you can give advice on that aspect of it?
On social media, we can only talk generically. We can't give advice because advice is bespoke to the individual. But we can explain things. So if you're a day rate contractor, as an example, some lenders have contractor specific criteria, and that means we can use your day rate to calculate your annual income. So rather than look at your limited company accounts or your tax returns, we take your contract value. So if you were on £500 a day, working a 5-day week, we then multiply that by a 46-week working year for most lenders, and that then gives us... I should have prepared and worked. I think it's 120 grand a year, but it's around that level, and that's a fairly simple way. A lot of those guys will still be working outside of IR35 through their own limited company, and if they don't need that level of income, clearly they won't be drawing it in salary and dividends from the business. We don't have to do a 2-year average or anything like that. Then we can get a contractor a mortgage the first day they start working on their contract, as long as they've got 2 years experience in the same industry, which most people do because it's not a route you go down. So yeah, as I said, it's a strong niche, but we have to be careful when we're talking about it that we're just talking generically about the lender's criteria and how that could apply to your personal situation. But everyone's different. If you're on £120,000 a year, single, no dependents, no car on finance, no credit cards, what you can borrow is very different to your colleague opposite who's married, 3 kids, 2 cars on finance, so it's always a very...
Yeah, I remember you ran through some examples, and it was really surprising how different it is. But same income, but just, the personal circumstance can make such a difference.
Make a big difference. And different lenders will look at things very differently. And a firm no from one bank can be a very welcoming yes from another. And that's really the key part of my job, is to understand as much of that criteria as I can. So normally during an initial appointment with a client, I'm already building a picture of where we're likely to end up with this particular mortgage.
Which lender is going to be most favourable for their situation.
That's why you come to a mortgage broker. My job is to save you time and save you money. It might be that you've had the same... I'm with Santander for my business banking. I'm with Santander for my personal banking, my mortgage, my house insurance, got a credit card with them, my car loans with Santander. And I've been with them since I was 17 when they were Abbey National. I opened my first bank account there to pay my first pay slip into. I still have the same bank account, but that counts for absolutely nothing. If I went to them for a particular mortgage product and I didn't hit their criteria, my 30-something years with them, 31 years of banking, loyalty means nothing. And then, as I said, it's quite cutthroat sometimes.
Yeah. So free spirit is what you're called nowadays. And where did that name come from? Who came up with that?
It wasn't me that came up with it. As I said, I wanted something that all my friends...
Obviously, I see the connection now with the whole...
All my friends laugh at it because I think if you Google free spirit, it talks about someone who's quite non-conformist and rebels against them. And I'm probably... I probably am not that person. I'm probably Mr. Average in terms of that kind of things. I generally, which is what you want from a mortgage advisor. I do play by the rules and that kind of things. But it's basically the freedom and flexibility I love about being self-employed.
So it's not the self-employed specialty then, because they're kind
of wrapped up in the same. I did a lot of work with Darren Harwood, who on the branding and the logo. I had the name initially. We had some great WhatsApps back and forth about Maverick and other potential.
I think there was rumour you were going to call it after your cat at one point.
Well, my cat obviously is a free spirit. I was trying to get the cat into the branding, and Darren, fortunately, is an expert in branding and said, is it cat related, the product? No, right. So we just get rid of that stupid idea, which is why, again, it's nice working with people that you know, because they can give you that sort of honest advice without fearing that you're going to be upset by it, that you'll take it rightly. And I knew what I wanted the brand and everything to look like without actually being able to draw or tell you that. And Darren seemed to have a great process of getting that out of me. The logo is kind of, there's a flame element to it, which is sort of a free spirit itself, a fire, a flame. So yeah, there's enough background you could waffle on about it for a period, but. Yeah.
So obviously you talked about LinkedIn. Is that where you'd say you get most of your referrals from, or is it the partnerships you do with these communities on LinkedIn? Or?
Most of my work. So I've been self-employed 7 years in June. So 6.5 years roughly at the time of recording. So I've got a reasonable back book of clients. So obviously existing clients provide a good level of refinancing their existing mortgage products, and then referring friends, family, other people they work with in the same line of work. LinkedIn is where I do most of my social media marketing. Joys of working for yourself, that suddenly you don't just become a mortgage broker. I've now done online courses in marketing and other bits and pieces. I work with Phil Barnes, a local videographer. So we've had a couple of series of videos, and which he very cleverly edits together to give some continuity, again, with branding and bits and pieces. I do networking face-to-face, obviously with yourself. I know Danny through BNI in the City chapter. So I get business from there. I'm part of Buy Local Norfolk. One of the things about rebranding to Free Spirit and having it as a Norfolk-based company was to look to push that angle. I'm obviously a stranger to Norfolk, or a newcomer, but I do think people here like to deal with local people.
Absolutely.
So again, I felt I was losing out by having a brand that was based in Chichester that didn't really have a purpose or a footing here. So I think that, again, that's worked quite well. As I said, I do the BNI, I do the Buy Local Norfolk, playing a couple of golf society. I do a reasonable amount of business generation,
and of course Lunch Club.
Lunch Club.
So I don't know. Have you got any challenges? How was lockdown for you? Obviously, you said you were in the right situation to deal with that sort of remote.
Yeah, the business model was good for lockdown. Obviously, the first 3 months were difficult because they shut the housing market, which turned off a lot of the taps. But after that was fine.
And of course, last 18 months, interest rates and.
I've got to be honest. The biggest challenge in the entire time I've been self-employed was just before I started Free Spirit. It was kind of the catalyst for it. Was the Liz Truss quasi budget. It basically just put the fear of God into people, and people didn't do anything for 3 months. And then when they did come back into play, people were way ahead of it was mainly remortgage business at that time. It really nullified the housing market. I'm sure as an estate agent you saw the worst of that as well. So it stopped people looking to purchase for a period, and suddenly I was doing remortgages, which quite often people leave it a little bit to the last minute, 4, 5, 6 weeks before the rate is up. People were reaching out 7, 8, 9, 12 months ahead of schedule, so too early to even do any written business. But then you would write the business, be 6 months before their existing rate finished, and then it takes about 5 weeks for me to get paid. So I went through a period of around 3 months where I didn't write enough business to keep trading, but could afford through safety nets and stuff to keep going, to a point where I was writing a reasonable amount of business, but I didn't get paid on it for 7 months. So I went through a period of 9 months when I paid myself the equivalent of 2 months' salary, which was difficult. I looked at going back to an employed role, spoke to 2 people who inspired me not to do that, and my other option was to set up on my own. I do get a slightly larger cut of the pie now. I have my own firm rather than before, so there was a little uplift there, and I felt that would maybe give me a bit more of a USP, something else to promote by promoting my own brand and business. Bizarrely, the two people were not business coaches or marketing or branding or anything like that. It was Brad Jordan, golf coach and life coach as it appears. But we often joke with Brad that going for a golf lesson is a bit like counselling.
Or you need a mortgage to go and have a lesson.
Well, you need a mortgage, to have a lesson with Brad. Yeah, that's very true. And the other person was Jules Cutter from RM Paving.
Very wise man, is that Jules?
Yeah, I met Jules through BNI. Jules has completely remodelled my garden, which took about 7 weeks. So I spent a lot of time with Jules in that period. We are not a dissimilar age, although I believe I have a few years on him. We like the prodigy. We both had a bit of a misspent youth. I think we did some similar activities when we were younger. We both enjoy fishing, the rugby. Jules has become a good friend, and just sort of said, if you do take an employed role, how long do you think you would stick at it? Would it last? What would you wave goodbye to? As I said, I had probably 4 or 5 years of backbook of clients and things like that. So, as I said, it's funny how people can mould your decisions or help you come to what hopefully was the right decision. Certainly I feel was the right decision. And landscape gardener and golf coach. So, don't get your business advice anywhere else.
And presumably to this day, you still think best decision you've ever made?
Yeah, absolutely. It's gone well. We don't like to get ahead of ourselves, touch wood. But the last 6 months of last year were the best 6 months I've had of being self-employed.
Which in the current climate is bloody good going. Yeah,
I've got to be honest, the interest rate rise it's not great for any of us personally. My mortgage, I had to renew in August 2023. My monthly mortgage payment went up 42%. So I feel the pain of my clients. But I do think it has driven more people to seek advice. If I'm honest, I don't think for my business it's necessarily been a bad thing, because people are presented with a number that they don't like, and therefore they're more curious to see what else might be out there. So I think it has been okay from a business perspective. The market overall might not have particularly grown, but I think more people within the market are seeking advice. About 70-75% of mortgages in the UK now are done through a broker and intermediary.
That's good numbers. I know I've always sort of recommended you, and it's always that struggle with, well, why wouldn't I go and speak to my bank? It's like you said, they don't know it. They think they've got loads of loyalty to their high street bank and they're going to give them the best rates. And then, well, why would I pay for someone? But it's just an easy one to answer for you and I, but for perhaps those who aren't so educated, it is, you could save them potentially thousands over the term. And
sometimes there's
and they're quibbling about 500 quid or whatever it is.
Yeah, sometimes there's no logic from the banks either. From a client's perspective, I've got a great client down in Hampshire, and they run a highly profitable business. They do all their business banking with a major high street bank and their personal banking. They went to speak to the bank because they had an £800,000 property. They were looking to trade up to sort of 1.4 million, only got £180,000 mortgage, something like that at the moment. So they weren't paying themselves a huge sum of money, but the business was making £250,000 a year profit. Now, no one is better placed to see that than the bank they do all their business banking with as well. And the bank would only use their salary and dividends to look at their mortgage application, and they needed 11 times their personal income to get a mortgage. Now, I'm very lucky that I'm friends with the business bank manager there, which is why I'm being very careful not to say the name of the bank. And he passes clients that they can't help my way. So I spoke to them and managed to place their mortgage with another high street bank who will look at their salary and their share of net profit from the company. So we ended up getting something which was about 3 times the net profit of the company, but 11 times their personal income.
You've just said something that really I always like to, it's probably some best left towards the end, I usually do, but is ask you, who would be an ideal person for you to be connected to. But I guess it could be someone who's in a high street bank who doesn't mind, if we can't help passing that on to
the
you.
Relationship I have there is great, as I said, and I think advantageous for the client. If you're the business bank manager, the head of business banking for a high street bank, and you as a provider can't help your clients, then by offering them, advice from someone who can review things from across the market. I think you're providing a service. I don't know how his employer would feel about it.
Yeah, of course.
Hence why being careful not to mention who it is. But absolutely. I think it's something that people will appreciate. I myself, I don't deal with commercial finance. If you're a huge portfolio landlord with 20 plus properties, etc., I'm probably not the right mortgage broker for you. That's not my day-to-day stuff. Am I qualified to do it? Yes. Would I have access to the lenders for it? Yes. Is it what I do every day? Would I be learning on the job? Yes. Would you be better with someone who does that day in, day out? Absolutely. And I don't think there's any shame in that by
absolutely
specialising. Mortgages is a wide area. There's later life lending, there's your buy-to-lets, commercial, all sorts of different avenues. I'm happy being an expert in the area I work in rather than being a bit more of a jack of all trades. And, I pass information across to other brokers who are stronger in areas that I'm not. And I feel the client's getting best advice there. And I'd like to think in the long run that the client will appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And I might see something back my way from them. Tristan from Zebra Invest is one. How he funds his own work. It's not my area at all.
When you said Tristan, I thought, well, surely you don't get him. Yeah.
But, he has, I've looked at mortgages for residential stuff for friends and family successfully of his. We have a good working relationship there, but absolutely he wouldn't come near me for any of his development finance and stuff, and I support that decision. So.
Yeah. So, what would you say has been your best success story, either working for a client or business-wise? I mean, it might have just been starting Free Spirit, but
best success from clients is, I think my favourite ones are when people have sadly been told that they can't do what they want elsewhere, be that from another mortgage broker or they've perhaps spoken to their own bank. So I wouldn't say it's massively, it doesn't happen every week, but that's quite a common one where someone will come to me because they've had a no elsewhere. Probably my favourite from that would be, did a mortgage not last year, the year before, 2023. I remember it because I was still doing it at Gatwick Airport, sat waiting to get my flight to Mexico for holiday. But two paramedics who both work on a day rate basis. So they were long-term paramedics, but fairly new to working on a self-employed.
I didn't know they did.
Basis. Well, they second to, we're not going to get political, but they second to the South Coast small boat rescue team.
Oh, okay.
So they and other paramedics are seconded to this team, and they get paid on a day rate and obviously work on a rota and bits and pieces. So they hadn't been doing it for 12 months or longer, so they didn't really suit self-employed criteria. And they were working kind of irregular shift patterns and bits and pieces. So for a lot of the contractor stuff, we're kind of looking for people to be working a set 3 days a week, 5 days a week, something. And these guys were doing ad hoc shifts, as you can imagine, in that kind of work. So they were kind of falling into grey areas across the board. They'd spoken to both their own, so it was a couple selling two houses to buy a bigger one together. And it was just a bit of a mess, really. So it was a grey area, but managed to get a lender who saw the common sense in what they were doing, the longevity of what they were doing.
I guess that's half the struggle, isn't it? Common sense, especially when you're talking about people.
Yeah,
so many times it's common sense, isn't it? But
a lot of the time with mortgages, the bigger high street banks, you're going to get a computer-based decision. There's not.
Computer says no.
They deal with too much. Your one mortgage is insignificant to them. The amount of mortgages I write a year are insignificant to them, let alone your one mortgage.
Yeah.
So you need to go somewhere slightly smaller where you can have a conversation with the underwriter, talk about the merits of a case, and be honest about sometimes, some of the negatives. Do the positives outweigh the negatives, and does the lender see a reason to lend, reason to support the case? Which again, why coming to someone who specialises in certain ways of working can be beneficial. You can't get a bespoke decision for everybody, but there are lenders out there where some things are a little bit of a grey area, and if we're good in other areas, they'll take a view on it. If you've got a small deposit, bad credit, you're looking for 6 times you're struggling in lots of ways. But if you've got a big deposit, if you're not looking for a huge loan to income, if the case has merits, then if it's a bit weak in some areas, well, sometimes we can talk it through with someone, as I said, and get what we call a common sense decision.
Yeah.
So I love cases like that. That's great. Business wise, yeah, I think you're right. I think starting the business, see it, touch wood, as I said, being successful is, there's a real, I don't always think of myself as a business. People say, what do you do? I say mortgage broker. I don't necessarily say that I own a mortgage brokers or run a mortgage brokers.
Well, on that, where do you see it going? Do you ever want to be have a team of others under you, or
no,
because some people don't, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And I've certainly been in both camps, and they
I think 28-year-old Neil would have seized the opportunity to go big and wanted to push and push hard for growth and bring people on board and look to build a team and something like that. 48-year-old Neil likes the freedom and flexibility of being small and nimble. There's no pressure to bring in wages to cover salaries of staff. I know business owners who've recently had to make people redundant and things like that just because cash flow issues, and that must be really, really difficult. And often with a smaller business, you can be quite good friends with people that you bring on board and are working with. So no, the pressures from some of that are not things that I'm looking for. I know people with bigger mortgage brokerages, and staff does seem to be one of their biggest headaches. So I'm quite happy being a one-man band. It works for me.
I think there's a lot to say about contentment, really, and you can.
Success is different things to different
It
people,
is,
isn't it?
very
Yeah,
much so,
and as I said, I think as you get a little bit older, you do see some of those things differently. I'm fortunate enough that I have a good work-life balance. My other half, who has a proper job, she's a teacher. She might say that my work-life balance is a little bit too far the other way. But that's one of the advantages that having a small firm just with you in it gives you. And I think if I was to push to, bringing on board people and bits and pieces, then there would be a different work-life balance in play.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it before. Obviously, the ability to play golf when you like and work when you like and work late if you want to or not. But you've certainly had a few holidays and like to travel. I know. But equally, I'm sure, like me, you'll pick up the laptop occasionally and just check in.
As I said, I have just come back from a very nice holiday for Christmas and New Year, but it was the first time in 6.5 years I didn't take my laptop on holiday. That was a new, as I said, the paramedics mortgage, I was literally doing that at Gatwick whilst eating my breakfast with the other half sat opposite me with a face that said, if that laptop doesn't go away soon, you are in a lot of trouble. There are pros and cons to the work-life balance thing, and the balance isn't always in the favour of the golf course. But you accept that, and sometimes it's great. It's great being busy. You don't mind working early, weekends, late, because the business is successful, and that's kind of what you're there for. And my work can be a bit like that. You can go through periods where not a lot happens, have set figures, written business targets based around how many new clients I speak to a month, which is all worked out on conversion rates and various other bits and pieces. But it does give me some confidence if maybe written business isn't where I want it to be. There's another matrix that I can go and review and say, well, actually, have I spoken to enough people this month? If I haven't spoken to enough people, I'm never going to write enough business. We were talking before we started today, actually, about how January for me is a month where I often have a lot of conversations but don't necessarily see written business from it, because it's a new year, people are doing new things and they want to talk to me about what they want to do later on in the year. Anyone I speak to in December Normally there's an immediate need. No one wants to talk about mortgages the week before Christmas unless they actually really want a mortgage.
Yeah.
So that gives you that confidence to enjoy the times when there's not so much to do. I remember last May, I did a month and a half's worth of business in a week, worked flat out for 7 days, and then probably did nothing for 2 weeks, which was lovely.
But presumably you're good at accounting for that fluctuation, I guess. You have to get good at that.
You get
financially, I suppose.
You get used to it. Yeah, you have to accept that, there'll be good months and bad. The difference between the best month and the worst month in the last 12, 18 months is, 5 figures. So, it's easy to get used to a great month. Well, see yourself down the Porsche dealership.
Yeah. I'm sure you've seen it in the estate agency world. There have been many agents over the years in Norfolk, just not accounted for the bad times.
I think luckily having worked in a commission-based role in estate agents for a number of years, where time flow to get paid is often very similar. You might sell 5 houses in a month, but it's going to be 3 to 6 months before you probably see that money in your bank account. So you're used to running a pipeline, looking at cash flow. Again, I do the same. I sat down this month, looked at what was in my pipeline, when I expected things to complete, when I will then subsequently see that. So I'm normally cash flow modelling 3 to 4 months in advance, just so I know. I know this month's been fine. Next month looks good. April looks great. March is going to be a bit thin, but I know April's going to be good. So then, if I need to take a little bit from savings or move something out of a tax pot, then at least I know I can put it back again the following month.
Or just be a bit active in advance of that lean period.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to know your numbers, I think.
Would you say, would you give any advice to someone maybe looking at this industry or looking to get into the industry?
If
you just don't do it at all, or
no, not at all. So I think the barrier to entry to being a mortgage broker isn't massively high. So you don't need a degree or necessarily great exam results. It's a separate qualification that you do, which is I've done CMAP. There is another company, so that's the Certificate of Mortgage Advice and Practice, I think. There's 3 exams to that. The first one is awful, which is the rules and regulations, and you can go on from there to do far further financial advice and bits and pieces. That really is hard. And the next 2 are more about mortgages themselves and the process. So I had a big advantage being an estate agent for those 2. I sat my exams backwards. So I did what I perceived to be the easiest one first, which meant went to like one of these Pearson VUE test centre things. So by the time I got to the hardest exam, I was really familiar with the exam centre, how it worked, how the computer system worked and bits and pieces. And I don't know if there was more or less riding on the first exam that I did last, because I'd passed the other 2 or not. But for whatever reason, it worked for me. So yeah, if you want to become a mortgage broker, you can do it that way. You can get a job as a trainee with the big estate agents. Again, people talk positively and negatively about those guys, but I think to go into an environment like that as a trainee, you will get good training. You'll get good processes and things drilled into you. If you want to do your CMAPs in your own time and set up self-employed, I say you're mad. You won't know what you're doing. You'll be qualified to give mortgage advice, but you won't know what you're doing. You won't have any processes. And you'll probably chew the ears off your friends and family for 6 months to try and get business. And I would reckon at the end of it, you would give up and hate it and never look at it again. I think the 2 years employed gave me such a good footing to kick on from. That would probably be my key take for anyone looking to do it. But I think it's a great industry to get into. You're providing the finance for one of the most important and exciting purchases that someone can ever make. So if you get it right, which if you know what you're doing, you will more than you don't. I mean, particularly being self-employed, I don't suggest to someone we apply for a mortgage unless I'm confident we're going to get that approval. Otherwise, I'd just be running around doing a lot of work for nothing with a lot of upset people. You're better to tell someone the truth or that it's not the right time, which can often be the instance. And then, as I said, you're involved in some of the back to when you and Claire bought your first house, or bits and pieces, how amazing that is. And, you know, you view the house and you love it, and there's excitement and nervousness. You get your offer accepted and you're excited and you're happy. The next big milestone really is getting the finances approved. And then most of the time, the legal side, it's not a formality, it's very complicated and there's lots going on. And I don't want any of my conveyancing friends to say, what do you mean it's a formality? But, you know, if it's a second-hand house, it's been sort of bought and sold a few times, there shouldn't really be anything in the legal side that catches you out. So I think, getting the finances approved is probably the first big hurdle for a lot of people. And you know, it's great to be involved. It's a real positive thing to work with.
What's your take on some of the reasons for the no? Certainly not necessarily to do with the financial situation of the buyers, but, you know, just these ridiculous things they've had in, like the leasehold one, for example, is quite a murky one. With, obviously, they don't like to lend on anything with less than 70 years left on the lease. I mean, I just can't see any logic in that, because, I mean,
the problem you've got there from a mortgage lender. So the mortgage lender always has to look at the worst case scenario. So let's just say we're doing
but surely worst case scenario is they own the property. You know, they sell the property when it gets down to 30 years or so.
But so if it's, so let's say there's a 70-year lease on a property and I want to get a 30-year mortgage on it. Now the reality is that we're going to do a 2-year fixed rate on that mortgage and refinance somewhere else. But
Exactly.
But the lender's got to think, well, actually, we're giving you a 30-year agreement, so we might still have the security at the end of the 30 years, when actually, if we give you this mortgage now, you could then only have 30, 35 years left. So at that point, what's the value in the lease? Because that's the issue with leasehold, is you don't really physically own anything. It's almost a 30-year AST, isn't it? I mean, it is a bit more than that, but you are simply just using that portion of a building for a set amount of time. So the lease is where the value is. So if there isn't, most mortgage lenders will want 60, 70 years left at the end of their mortgage term as a minimum, which generally means we want 80 plus years on the lease for it really to be mortgageable. And I think a lot of clients were buying a leasehold property. I mean, going back a few years when I worked in London, this would often be first-time buyers. Here in Norfolk, most first-time buyers now are buying a freehold house. So leasehold is more buy-to-let. We've got a bit more knowledge. They haven't got a clue. They don't know what it is. They don't really understand. I certainly didn't when I was in my 20s and started in estate agents. Didn't really understand what a lease was. You thought you were buying a flat, but you really aren't. So I think for a lot of buyers, it's important that the lender flags it.
I'm just trying to think of some of the other reasons for no, but they are quite ridiculous in some cases.
A lot of them now, we can have things like lenders are very anti stuff like doubling, so onerous leasehold terms, like doubling ground rents and stuff. But again, is this just freeholders kind of taking?
Hopefully, it's all being reformed anyway. Even the the right to renew is being reformed, isn't it?
We get stuff like that. I mean, you get one of the common ones we'll have, which will resonate with people locally for Norfolk, but there are in various parts of Norwich the British Industrial Steel Foundation, or tin tops as they used to be when I was in estate agent. I don't know if that's still the right term. The tin top properties. Now they're below market value for similar square footage in the local area of a traditional build, but some lenders will lend on them and some won't. And that's a bit of a strange one to try to explain to a client why. It might be again that they've gone to their own bank and they've sent out a surveyor and just returned a nil value on construction type, but the bank next down the high street will happily give a mortgage on.
It's like some of the semi-detached properties by the UEA. They're prefabricated, so prefab. Lenders hated them years ago. They were only supposed to be built to last 50 years or whatever it was. They're still standing 100 years later, and they're now lending on them perfectly. So I mean, it's
you get bits and pieces there. Sometimes they want those re-bricked, and then if it's a semi, both houses have got to be re-bricked, because obviously there's no good. Your security's there and next door falls down. Certainly construction types is an area, and what I think becomes more frustrating from a mortgage side of things is what we'll sometimes see is that the big house builders will be using some of these modern methods of construction, and lenders will accept a some of the SIP panels and bits and pieces, say from like a Bellway or a Bovis. But if you're a small independent builder, they might not accept, and you might want to make the argument that perhaps a small independent builder is providing a different quality of product. Some of new builds have a interesting reputation in some cases, not wishing to do down any of the big house builders, but there is that. So that can be a little bit frustrating when they accept a certain construction type, but only from a short list of builders. There are sometimes reasons that aren't the client and their finances why we get a no on a particular property. Acreage is a funny one. A lot of lenders won't lend if you've got much over 4 or 5 acres. Certainly much over 10, because what are you going to, if you or I bought a house with 10 acres, what are we going to do with the land? We've probably in our mind got some entrepreneurial money raising.
Why is that a risk to the lender?
Because you're then going to be doing other things with it. And as I said, you've got to think for these high street banks, if we bought £1 million house, it's nothing to them. They're not making any real, they just don't want the hassle. That, and I think sometimes that's, what looks like a big number to us when you look at a lender's book of billions is they want vanilla, mainstream, simple things.
But then equally, there are specialist lenders, aren't there, for build your own and self-build.
And you get bizarre situations where, Nationwide are one of the most vanilla high street building societies, not banks, but building societies out there. But they have one of the best policies around an annex in terms of if you buy a house with an annex, they'll let you let it. They'll let you Airbnb it. Whereas some of the other high street banks who we think of as being more flexible won't. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful little twists to criteria.
You brought it up. Why are they so anti Airbnb? Surely that's giving the vendor more the owner more income.
Often it's a simplistic thing like the house is their security. You're going to let random people come and stay in it for random reasons. Are you insured for that? Because a lot of people won't have the right buildings insurance. I would argue a lot of properties on Airbnb in the UK, I don't know globally, but in the UK, are possibly breaching mortgage and insurance conditions. Without really the owner particularly being aware that they've done that. As I said, the Airbnb, you're right, is something which it's new and it's modern. Lenders are old and slow to react.
It's new.
Yeah, absolutely. But mainly you'll find it's probably down to insurance. If you had, let's say you let your house to Airbnb and there was a fire and the house burnt down and the insurance doesn't pay out, well, where's the bank security? And as I've said previously, they're looking at hundreds of thousands of houses they've got mortgaged across the country. It's easier to say no to something and miss out on a little bit of business than it is to say yes to it and have a problem down the line.
Well, one thing I haven't touched on, and I like to, technology, obviously it's what I do. Is there anything you've used over the last few years or implemented more over the last few years? We mentioned Teams and Zoom. Is that on the increase? Is there any sort of software you're using now that's...
There's a little bit of Teams and Zoom, definitely. And again, I think as I get older or clients get younger, that's perhaps something that people like to see. It's not quite the same as meeting face-to-face, but it does put a face to the name a little bit more. Actually, I work under a network in terms of the compliance side of things. And we're currently running a CRM system that I think probably predates Hotmail. But there is a new one literally being rolled out. I've yet to be given the date of when I'm going to be getting it. But hopefully that's going to be a positive. As I said, I'm a little bit old school. I still run a spreadsheet. So I have all my clients and bits and pieces on Excel. I have an annual Excel spreadsheet that I run just because it means I've got all my data. Were I to change networks or something like that, I'm not reliant on a third-party CRM system that I might lose access to. But no, things like that are great. In fairness, you look after my IT and bits and pieces. So, I think Office 365's come a reasonable way. I work from my phone sometimes. I can hotspot. I like to have a week in France every year on a lake in the middle of nowhere fishing, but I take my laptop, a hotspot off my phone, I can
You
work.
don't see anything, I don't know, AI related coming into this industry, or maybe to give a yes or a no from the lender's point of view, not yourself so much, but do you think any of that is coming?
I think AI is going to be an interesting thing. If you roll back a few years, you had a lot of tech-based funding come into the mortgage market around stuff like robo-advice, which really was a bit of a decision tree kind of process. It's not really gone anywhere because realistically what happened, as we touched on earlier, mortgage advice is bespoke to the customer. So the problem I think they had was that you would go in as a client to this kind of robo-advice online service, and they would almost need you to acknowledge that you were having a non-advised service. Otherwise, you had to physically speak to someone before you could submit the business so that you could actually get some advice.
Yeah.
AI obviously is a leap ahead from that simple sort of process, but I would imagine, not being an expert, that still kind of sits a little bit, you say yes or no here and we guide you here or there.
I'm sure there's some already in there, isn't there?
I'm sure it will change. I'm 48. I'm hopeful that I'll be out of the industry at some point in the next sort of 20 years. But yeah, I'm sure it's going to have some influence and bits. But certainly for an advice sector like the one I work in, I still think there would be an element of human
You'd like to think
touch
so,
that is required.
For those examples we've talked about where, some things do not make sense on paper, but they need.
And you see, you'll speak to a client who, I often speak to clients, obviously always speak to clients, but sometimes people want to give me a lot of information, 90% of which isn't relevant, and they only give me 10% of what I need, hence why we do a fact-finding call. Turnover is a common one with business owners, and again, sometimes because people have got some swanky turnover, I've been telling you about it as well. But the reality is your turnover isn't relative, it's your profit that we're interested in. So, people don't always know what they want. I've had clients who've made a decision about the overall term of a mortgage, or the term they tie themselves in for, although their intentions were to move house within that period, and then they've been stuck with a lender that doesn't suit their circumstances. That's pay an early repayment charge to come out of a mortgage, where part of the process with a broker is, I think sometimes part of the advice is to be a bit like a toddler. So I'll be wanting to know why you want to do something. Why is it you want to do? Why is it you want a 5-year fixed rate? Well, what are you going to do? Are you going to be in the house in 5 years? Do you want to move? Then I can tailor hopefully the right solution for yourself. So yeah, as I said, I'm not sure how much of that. I don't know how AI is able to keep asking you why to narrow down to the nitty gritty of what it is you're actually, looking to do to give you the best advice. We shall see.
Well, interesting stuff, Neil. I don't think I've got any questions for you, but unless you've got anything you want to add.
No. Thanks for having me in. It's been really interesting. Obviously, anyone, as we've sort of touched on, mortgage advice is very bespoke to you, the individual. So if there are any business owners or anyone who's curious as to the mortgage side of things, then please look me up. It's Free Spirit Mortgages. I'm sure Danny will link some connections and bits and pieces in there.
Absolutely.
I'm always happy to talk to clients and see how we can help. You don't have to need a mortgage in the next 4 weeks. I think the longest I've gone from initial conversation to submitting business is 18 months, particularly with self-employed people. It's got to be the right time. If you've
as I found out, you sometimes a lot of business owners just aren't paying themselves enough, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And it might be a conversation with you to say, no, look, you've got to pay yourself a bit more for even a few years before we look at this.
As I touched on earlier, I had a tricky period with the trust quasi thing. My trading year is up this June. It's going to be a decent year off the back of 2 not very good ones. I'm going to need another year's books before I myself could look to increase my own mortgage and bits and pieces. Sometimes it is just the timing, and it's nice to know that. So, again, first time buyers saving for a deposit. If we talk to you now and let you know what you can do, you're saving with a little bit more intent, knowing that you can get the finance that you need to go alongside the deposit to buy a house, rather than you're just putting money away each month.
Well covered, mate. We got on camera as well.
We said when we put that up there, you said you'd warn me.
Well, I wasn't going to. I saw your hand come up. Brilliant.
Cut.
Did we cut there?
Yeah.
We just had the window fall down on him anyway, or the bit that I covered the window up with. Right, we're going to wrap it.
That's enough for one day.
Fucking hell, did you get it?
Yeah. Luckily, I just hit myself on the back of the head.
Fuck. See, this is the problem. We're now going to cut this bit in, and you're going to have a white glow on the side of your face, which you didn't have there before.
Well, that's because the thing covering the window just hit me on the head.
All right.
So
We'll have to leave it in, won't we?
Yeah.
But, Neil,
Perfect.
thanks
No
for coming on, mate.
Danny, cheers, mate. Pleasure.
Cheers.
Good to see you.
The Norfolk Business Show. With Danny Snelling. Sponsored by MT Comms.